Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. Where do we even begin? Of all of the FNaF games, this game is the one that probably gets brought up the most in modern day discussions, at least in terms of the pre-Steelable games, because whenever a new entry into the series comes out, be it game, movie, or book, everyone asks the same question. How does this change sister location? We found the scooper underneath the Pizzaplex? Probably a good idea to go through sister location. Circus Baby and the Fun Times having a huge focus and Help Wanted too? Yep, gotta go brush up on sister location again. Edwin Murray having a secret underground tunnel leading directly to his home from an underground pizzeria? Yep, that's sister location imagery. Gotta go back to that real quick. The main antagonistic force of the franchise right now being directly associated with voice mimicry? Well, that's exactly what the Fun Times do, so I guess sister location is back on the menu. The FNaF 2 movie showing us a giant circus baby animatronic that already has green eyes, despite the fact that Elizabeth hasn't been an established character yet, which has led a good chunk of the fandom to believe that Vanessa is a robot child, and that the real Vanessa was grabbed just like Elizabeth was? Well, would you look at that, we're right back at sister location. Every single time. For that reason, I think that sister location might actually be the most important game to talk about, because at some point, we have to settle on an answer for some of the things in this game, and I think that we might finally have everything that we need. At least, that's what I want to think. But unfortunately, with how the series has evolved in the years since sister location's release, we're really stuck on trying to figure out how much Scott planned ahead. Obviously, when making this game, he had some ideas for the future. I don't think he ever meant for sister location to be the final game of the story, especially after that ending. But did he plan an entire decade ahead? Almost certainly not. But with how a few things we see in more modern games line up with sister location, we can't outright deny the possibility. It feels like Scott is doing one of two things. It feels like he's either centering everything around sister location and using it as a basis to retroactively build the rest of his story around, or he's had all of this planned from the start. If you ask me, I don't think that it's possible he had all of this planned from the get-go. But I definitely do think that he left a lot of things in this game intentionally vague. That way he had the option to come back to it in the future. So now, here we are, with almost all of the pieces available to us. I don't think we can put them all together, not without a bit more clues from the inevitable follow-up to Ruin, whenever we get that. But I think that we can put enough together to get something really close to the full picture. Let's begin. First off, a quick recap. The game opens up with a conversation between William Afton and an unnamed individual who questions the design choices for Circus Baby. We're not sure who this person is, but I think that it's probably not meant to be a cop. My best guess is that it's actually just a Fazbear Entertainment shareholder. Circus Baby is specifically designed for Afton Robotics, so there's probably nobody that William would be willing to answer to, except for the people lining his pockets. After that short scene, we're brought into the actual gameplay. Sister location sees us playing as the purple guy's son, Michael Afton, alongside Hand Unit, his portable guide for the game. We get to experience Michael's first week working at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, whose namesake animatronic is currently being possessed by his late younger sister, Elizabeth Afton. His job is essentially just to check on all of the animatronics, make sure they're all working properly, and then go home. But unfortunately for him, his nights are typically not that simple. The first night is, for the most part, fairly unremarkable. The one thing that I think is actually interesting to note is the fact that there's yellow warning tape surrounding the vent entrance that Mike has to take every night. I can't imagine that Fazbear Entertainment cares enough about their workers to do this, considering some of the things that we see happen in this very game. Instead, I actually think that it might be for others. One thing we learn on night 1 is that Ballora's room, officially known as the Ballora Gallery Party Room, is a place for kids to get fit and enjoy pizza. That implies that kids are actually down here sometimes. Probably not very often, but at least sometimes. Interesting. Put a pin in that one for now, we might have to come back to it later. Night 2 is a bit more intense for Michael. He essentially starts his shift learning that a dead body was found in the very vents that he's crawling through right now. which I will only ever use as Fazburger evidence and nobody can stop me. And almost immediately after that, Hand Unit, or more accurately, the angsty teen voice that's playing in Hand Unit's place, starts freaking out. Some people can hear the following words: heights, elevation, passive, unlimited, standards. You can get the words help us out of this if you tried to. Personally, I don't hear unlimited, I hear argumentative. This is also a rearrangement of the words to get help us. The proper order goes argumentative / unlimited, standards, elevation, passive, heights. I could see us maybe getting the word phase out of this if you looped it, but certainly not help us, which requires replacing a word, reordering them, and arbitrarily taking the first 2 letters of only one of the words. I also don't think that the Funtimes would actually ask for help, but that gets into my thought process on how the Funtimes actually work, which we'll get into later in the video. Soon after, we find ourselves in Circus Baby's room. She tells us that she doesn't recognize us, and that there's a space under the desk for us to hide in, specifically telling us that someone before us crafted it.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him.
We're never given any information on who this person is, but I've heard some people say that it's the Help Wanted 2 protagonist, as Baby tells him that she recognizes him in that game.
I recognize you.
After this, Hand Unit kinda starts to turn on Mike, giving him advice that would actively get him killed in Ballora Gallery, and then talking aloud to potentially alert Ballora to his presence. After this, Mike gets to the breaker room and sees... I'm not even gonna try summarizing the absolute monstrosity that is this map. Night 3 continues the insanity. Hand Unit pretends that Ballora and Funtime Foxy are normal, when they're very clearly not. Baby tells us the story about how she killed a girl, Hand Unit gives us more bad advice on how to get through the Funtime Auditorium, we take a power module out of Funtime Freddy that looks way too small to power an entire animatronic, and then we get jumped by Funtime Foxy on our way out. This leads into Night 4. Where we're trapped in a mysterious springlock suit that we still don't know the identity of. Baby tells us that she kidnapped us, calls Ballora a dumbass, and then we watch Ballora get obliterated by a giant claw machine, while Baby wishes us luck on surviving a potential springlock failure. After Mike somehow manages to survive that, he comes back the next day. He gets told that he'll be receiving a basket of exotic butters for a job well done, and begins his final shift at Circus Baby's, where he removes a chip from Circus Baby's arm, and then gets his insides removed by the same giant claw machine that he saw tear Ballora apart. And then, a culmination of all of the Funtime animatronics, otherwise known as ennard, crawls inside of him and wears him like a skin suit. Or, alternatively, Mike goes against Baby's requests, sits and survives in a private office for 6 hours, goes home, and get jumped by ennard while watching the season finale to the soap opera that he spent the past several nights watching. We'll talk about that later. This is the end of the base game of Sister Location, but soon after its release, Scott released the Custom Night DLC for free. The gameplay is what you'd expect from a custom night, and the cutscenes that play after each milestone are, for the most part, pretty underwhelming. Most of the cutscenes consist of Michael walking down the street, progressively getting sicker and sicker. This leads up until the second to last cutscene, where his skin is fully purple, he's dragging his feet, and then he literally vomits ennard out of his body. Something interesting to note is that there are 5 eyes on ennard during the animation of him being spit out, but a 6th eye appears when they look from the sewer grate after Michael somehow stands back up. 5 of the eyes are pretty simple: Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Bonbon. The extra 6th eye is blue. This could be another one of Funtime Freddy's eyes, and the fact that it's blue might represent the fact that Funtime Freddy eventually takes control over ennard. It could also be because the actual eye that ennard has in his eye socket on Ennard Night is blue. Alternatively, it might be from the out-of-service animatronic that, again, we know nothing about. And then, to end it off, we hear a message from Michael Afton to his father, William. Mike tells his father that he put Elizabeth back together, that he should be dead, and that the only thing left for him to do is to find him. Then we see Springtrap for a moment, and the game finally ends. I skipped over a few of the finer details in that explanation, but that's a general gist of the events of Sister Location. I'm saving the specifics of everything that happened for the rest of the video because, good lord, this video is long enough and I really don't want to spend too long on the recap. I'd much rather get into the game in depth. But before I can do that, we need to have a conversation. We need to sit down and talk about retcons. Retcons are weird in FNaF. I hear people tossing the idea of there being retcons in this series around all the time. It's one of those things that really irks me. I don't like going around and just saying, oh yeah, that's a retcon, but in some cases, I get why some people are doing it. Emphasis on some. You see, when it comes to FNaF, we're not really talking about retcons. We're talking about ScottCons. What's a ScottCon, you ask? Well, simply put, it's Scott Cawthon's definition of a retcon. To understand this, let's first go over what a retcon actually is. This is how Merriam-Webster defines retcon: the act, practice, or result of changing an existing fictional narrative by introducing new information in a later work that recontextualizes previously established events, characters, etc. Sounds simple enough, yeah? Okay. So now, let's go over what Scott has said about retcons. The truth is that I've done one actual retcon in the series, although I'm not going to say where it was. There have been other times, however, when my original intentions didn't come across clearly. In those instances, I make a point to clarify in the next game. That's not really a retcon. It's simply an attempt to guide the story toward where it was originally intended to go. So while it's true that the story has developed new details over time that may not have been planned from the beginning, that doesn't mean that the pieces don't fit together as a whole. By the factual definition of the word retcon, literally everything in this series has been retconned to some extent, because it includes introducing new information in a later work that recontextualizes previously established events. But by Scott's definition, that doesn't make it a retcon, at least not in his eyes. In Scott's mind, even if the story has developed new details over time that he didn't plan out, it's fine. Just as long as the pieces fit together to make mostly the same story, everything is fine. So the only things that count as retcons to Scott are things that directly contradict the information that has been physically laid out in the games. And when I say directly, I mean directly. Your favorite theory is probably still not confirmed, no matter how concrete it may or may not be. Honestly, looking back on this series of videos that I've been doing, I kind of wish that I paid attention to this sooner. I think that trying to solve games in isolation is a fun thought experiment, I truly do, but there's no reason for us to be trying to solve the entire timeline by cutting ourselves off from new information. The reason that I'm bringing all of this up is because I'm going to talk about a number of things in this video that were only properly introduced to us in Secret of the Mimic. Does that mean that I think he planned all of this 10 years in advance? No. What I'm saying is that he didn't have to plan that far ahead, and this whole Reddit post is my reasoning for that. I don't think that we should be trying to prioritize Scott's original vision when discussing this game, because not even he is prioritizing that. I think that he's actively pulling on dangling plot threads that have been left dormant for the past 10 years, which is how he said he wrote his stories in the second interview with Dawko.
You know, whenever I'm making these games, there are a lot of things that are in my head that are just flowing ideas. And when I have them and put them there, it's the first half of something. It's like a string or a rope just like reaching out. And I know that what's there on the other end is there. I trust that it's there. I know that it's there. And then whenever I progress forward, the rest of that just reappears. The rest of it appears and just fits into place perfectly. That's how all my games have been made. I feel that there is something there, and I make the roads to get there for that to be revealed. But then sometimes when things do progress, the roads aren't always the same roads as the ones that had been planned before. And so what that means is, even though at the time Something was definitely there. Something was definitely reaching out to be there, and I could feel that it was there. The progression of the story didn't go there, and so those strings never got pulled on, and those and the other half of that idea remained in the ether, remained in my subconscious.
With all of that said, he also changed the child who died in Take Cake to the Children from being a him to being Henry's daughter. And this was after his "I've only made one actual retcon" statement. And sure, changing the gender of this kid doesn't actually do anything in the grand scheme of things, but like, he still did it, you know? The overall point I'm trying to make here is that Scott has a weird relationship with retcons in this series. You could call a lot of things a retcon if you tried hard enough, but I don't want to do that. It's just not my thing, mostly because it opens a massive can of worms. Now that that's out of the way, let me reiterate. I will be using information from future entries in this series to recontextualize and shift my understanding of what we're seeing in this game. And considering that a good chunk of the community thinks that the next FNaF game to come out will be a direct sequel to Sister Location, and considering all of the Sister Location imagery we've been getting in the most recent games in the series, I think that this is entirely fair game. And with that, let's begin our proper deep dive into Sister Location, starting off with when it all happens. When it comes to Sister Location, there are quite a few things that we need to place in the timeline. Specifically, we have when Circus Baby's Pizza World opened, and by proxy the death of Elizabeth, when Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental opened, and when the actual gameplay of Sister Location takes place. There have been a variety of answers speculated by the community for the past several years, but I think that I have the most satisfying answers that we'll ever get, assuming that we never get more information about this from Scott in the future. On night 1 of Sister Location, we're told this.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment. Unlike most entertainment venues, our robotic entertainers are rented out for private parties during the day, and it's your job to get the robots back in proper working order before the following morning.
We're directly being told about Sea-Bear here, the rental location that we're currently working at, not Circus Baby's Pizza World. And this opened up after the massive success and unfortunate closing of Freddy's. While it's true that we have at least 3 instances of a Freddy's location closing down, we only really have one instance of a Freddy's location being successful, the original location, where the MCI happened in 1985. Using this, we can pretty safely say that Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental was opened after the closing of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and presumably sometime before the FNaF 2 location opened up 2 years later. So we can place it sometime between mid to late 1985 and mid to late 1987. I personally lean more toward it happening in mid to late 1985, but I don't think that the specific year changes anything much in this instance. With that out of the way, let's turn our heads to Circus Baby's Pizza World. We know that this location came before Sea-Bear, and that it never actually fully opened. Instead, it just went through a test run, and Circus Baby herself was only ever on stage for one singular day. The day that Elizabeth was killed by her. Circus Baby tells us this herself.
Did you know that I was on stage once? It wasn't for very long, only one day.
So now we have to ask the big question. When did this happen? Or more importantly, in the case of the overall timeline, was this before or after the MCI? Unfortunately, we don't have anything in the form of direct evidence to lead us in one direction or another, but we do have one thing to look toward: Baby's secret numbers. Throughout the entire game, you can hear extremely slowed down sound clips of Baby saying 4 numbers within the ambience. 1, 5, 7, and 8. The fact that these numbers are hidden tells me that they have to be important. The only thing that really makes sense for what these numbers could mean is a date. It can't be a year, because none of the possible combinations could ever lead to a year that would be relevant in any capacity. So we have to turn these 4 numbers into a singular date: a month, a day, and a year. And logically speaking, the date has to be plausibly relevant, meaning that the third number either has to be a 7 or an 8. because the date being something that happened in the 1910s or 1950s just wouldn't really tell us anything. And just for argument's sake, in case anyone brings it up, I cannot possibly imagine the 2010s being relevant either. With this in mind, we have 6 possible combinations for the final 2 numbers: 71, 75, 78, 81, 85, 87. The only clue we have left for this now is that these numbers are probably relevant to Elizabeth. The fact that it's being spoken by Circus Baby in such a distorted tone tells me that, whatever this is, it's a pretty big secret. I can only imagine this secret having to do with Elizabeth, as she is the centerpiece of Baby's entire character. So, under this thought process, I can only think of 2 options for this date. It's either the day that she was born, or the day that she died. This lets us cross off a few of the combinations we just listed out. By our logic, she's already dead by 1987, so we can cross 87 off of the list. And since she's a child when she dies, we can fairly reasonably cross off 71 as well, because there's no way that she's that old. This leaves us with only 4 options left. Before continuing, we should establish how old Elizabeth is. We can't get an exact number, but using context clues, we can determine that she's more than likely younger than the crying child. The main reason that I think this comes from Secret of the Mimic. In this game, you can find 5 flowers on the wall with faces that look like they would actually match up with the Afton family fairly well. We even have a scene of the representative of the crying child in a hospital bed talking to a yellow animal. And looking at these flowers, the one that represents Elizabeth is a literal baby. Sure, that's in part due to her possessing an animatronic that's called Baby, but still, I think this is pretty clearly telling us that Elizabeth is the youngest of the Aftons, but probably not that much younger than Cece. So, how old is the crying child? Well, in Curse of Dreadbear, which seems to be very CC coded, we can find a birthday cake with 7 candles on it. And since the crying child died on his birthday in 1983, we can assume that the crying child was born in 1976, and died the day that he turned 7. Liz is younger than him, but they were alive at the same time, as she already has her own room in FNaF 4. Okay, let's take a second to recap real quick so that we don't get too lost. We've been given 4 numbers, 1, 5, 7, and 8. We're trying to get a full date out of these, presumably a date that is somehow relevant to Elizabeth. I'm going to assume that it's either the day that she was born or the day that she died. 2 of the 4 numbers need to make up a year that's relevant to the franchise, meaning the year in question is 71, 75, 78, 81, 85, or 87. We established that Elizabeth is younger than the crying child, who we established was born in 1976, so we can cross 71 and 75 off of the list. In addition to this, Elizabeth's death was definitely before 1987, so we can cross 87 off of the list too. So, for this date that we're trying to find, the year is either 78, 81, or 85. Got all that? I hope so, because it's time for us to take things a little bit further. Because now we have to decide whether this is meant to be the day that Elizabeth was born, or the day that she died. The only way we can really get this done is by plugging things in and seeing what sticks. So let's start off by trying to see what the date would be if this is meant to be when she died. Elizabeth was born sometime after 1976, at the earliest 1977, but realistically it was probably later than that. She wasn't a literal infant when she died, so I doubt that she died in 1978, letting us cross that off of the list. I'm also going to cross 81 off of the list for a bit of a more complicated reason. The Night Force Springlock suit. We're gonna talk about this suit later, trust me. But for right now, what we need to know is that by the time of Circus Baby's Pizza World opening, the suit was already seemingly deemed too dangerous to use. So, when were the Springlocks deemed too dangerous to use? We don't have an exact date on that, but we know for sure that it was after 1983, considering what happened to the crying child. By this logic, I don't think that Liz could have died in 1981 either. There's also the fact that I'm pretty sure she died around the same age that Cece was when he died. After all, she's able to walk around on her own and can properly speak. So she's at least, like, 5, but she definitely still sounds like a very young child. So I think she'd be too young to die in 1981 anyway. And on top of all of that, we have fairly good reason to believe that Circus Baby's entertainment and rental opened up fairly soon after the closing of Circus Baby's Pizza World. If you take a look at the source code of Scott's website, specifically when it was announced that Circus Baby's Pizza World was cancelled, it says, "There is still a bright future for Circus Baby, so be watching for her to appear at a neighborhood party near you." This implies, at least to me, that there was not a lot of time between these two establishments opening up. As soon as Pizza World was done, I think William was making moves to get entertainment and rental opened up. Or, at the very least, it wasn't very long at all. Definitely not multiple years in my mind. All of this leaves us with 85 as the final combination left to us, which would mean that if these numbers are trying to tell us when Elizabeth died, then her death was sometime in 1985. But it wasn't just sometime in 1985. It was one of 2 dates. After all, we still have the other 2 numbers from the original 4 we had to work with, 1 and 7. Plugging these in, it would mean that Elizabeth died either on January 7th or July 1st of 1985, which practically tells us nothing. It's been established in multiple continuities that the MZI took place around summertime in 1985, with the month given to us usually being June. This would mean that her death is either before or after the MCI, so we're kind of just back to square one under this train of logic. Sure, you could use the background from Circus Baby's minigame to say that this happened during the summer rather than the winter, and I wouldn't entirely fault you for it, but that's very clearly not exactly how things went down that day. Circus Baby was not launching cupcakes into kids' mouths like a projectile on the day that Circus Baby's Pizza World was open. She was on stage, just like she said she was. But if you want to go down this route, then it would mean that Elizabeth died on July 1st of 1985, which is presumably very soon after the MCI, as in within the same week. However, I'm not really satisfied with that answer. I think it ultimately ends up as a little bit of a cop-out, like we're just grasping at straws to solve a 50-50 in the end. So instead, let's try to explore what this date would mean if it's meant to be the year that Elizabeth was born. First of all, looking at the 3 numbers that we narrowed things down to earlier, 78, 81, and 85, we can immediately cross 85 off of this list, as Cece and Liz were definitely alive at the same time, considering they both have a room in FNaF 4. This means that she was either born in 1978 or 1981. Now again, if we assume that she died around the same age that Cece did when he died, then we can work backwards a little bit. Cece was 7 years old when he died, so if Liz was born in 1981, then that would mean that she died sometime around 1988, give or take a year. Which is impossible because, as we established earlier, Circus Baby's entertainment and rental opened between 1985 and 1987, more than likely in 1985, if it was opened in response to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closing that same year. And this location has to come after Elizabeth's death, so she can't have been born in 1981. This means that if these 4 numbers of 1578 are meant to give us the date that Elizabeth was born, then she has to have been born in 1978. Plugging the other 2 numbers in, it would mean that the day that she was born is either January 5th or May 1st of 1978. Personally, I've always viewed Elizabeth as a May child, probably due to the flower on her wall in FNaF 4, but that doesn't really change anything about the theory. What this would mean, under the idea that Elizabeth was around the same age as the crying child when she died, is that Circus Baby's Pizza World opened in 1985, which is somehow the exact same conclusion that we had come to earlier when we were trying to see what the date would be if it was referencing her death. The only thing that we've gotten from this really is that Elizabeth was either 6 or 7 when she died. So, what now? Look, I'm gonna level with you here, there's no concrete way to push this any further. Anything from this point on is going to be an assumption, so let's just rip the band-aid off and do it. For the sake of coming to a conclusion, I have the slightest bit of a reasoning to believe that Elizabeth also died on her birthday, due to a baby voice line in both FNAF 6 and Help Wanted, where she says,
"It feels like my birthday. Did you have a gift for me?"
This is far from concrete, but it's all I've got, man. And it would place her death squarely before the MCI happened, by at least a bit more than a month. It's honestly a bit of an unsatisfying conclusion, but if I'm being entirely honest with you, the final date that we ended up with was one of 4 options, and 3 of those options ended with Elizabeth's death being in pre-MCI 1985 anyway. So while I can't deny the possibility of Elizabeth's death happening post-MCI, I'm personally going to use everything that I've just laid out to say that she died slightly before it. Does it take a few assumptions? Yes, but literally what doesn't in this series anymore? As one final note on this subject, there are definitely at least a few people who are going to stand firm by the idea that Elizabeth was 5 or 6 years old when she died, as she was in kindergarten in the novel trilogy. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that, because it doesn't particularly change anything. Her death would still happen pre-MCI, and it'd probably be sometime in early 1985. Plus, the Silver Eyes is not in game's continuity. So now, we can finally stop talking about that timeline placement, and to talk about the other one. We've talked about when Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental opened, as well as when Circus Baby's Pizza World opened, which included when Elizabeth Afton died. So the only thing left to ask is, when does the actual gameplay of Sister Location take place? To start, let's establish a range. Obviously, it has to be after the opening of Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, so it has to be at the very least post-1985. I am also very confident in saying that this game takes place before FNAF 3. If you watched my FNAF 3 video, then you know that I fully subscribe to the idea that the survival logbook was written in by Mike during his week working at Fazbear's Fright. If you haven't watched that video, too bad, because this video is already way too damn long, just check the iCard. Back on topic, if we look in the logbook, we can see that Mike drew the exotic butters that he earned for his first week at work at Circus Babies. There's also the fact that Michael saying, "I'm going to come find you" at the end of Custom Night is definitely referring to FNAF 3. So this has to take place sometime before FNAF 3. I also concluded in my FNAF 3 video that that game takes place during 2015, so we're going to say that our current range is from 1985 to 2015. We can slim this range down even further thanks to something else from FNAF 3, Follow Me. In that minigame, we can see William Afton tearing apart the animatronics. Under Molten MCI, which is a nearly universally agreed upon theory in the community, which states that William Afton melted down the FNAF 1 endoskeletons and infused their remnant into the Funtime animatronics, Sister Location has to take place after FNAF 1. The earliest year that I've ever seen theorized for when FNAF 1 takes place is 1989, which would mean that our range is narrowed down to sometime between 1989 and 2015. This range is expected. Multiple people have come to this conclusion already. You've probably heard it in another theory video at some point. So, can we take it a step further? Well, almost. There is something that you can find within the game that's interesting. However, it's also incredibly misleading if you don't know what it actually means. And surprisingly, this one isn't even Scott's fault. It's just an unfortunate part of how Click Team works. Let me explain. First of all, I'd like to bring up the weirdest Easter egg in the entire franchise. On Night 2 in Ballora Gallery, if you hold 0 and 1 on your keyboard until a counter named Morum reaches 5,000, which takes exactly 83 seconds, you're shown a blue screen with a bunch of numbers on it. And every few seconds, you have a 1 in 100 chance for the game to grab your computer's time and add some random numbers to it. I'm not going to spend more time explaining exactly how that works in this context because that would be doing a little bit too much. What I can tell you, however, is that if you decompile the game and find this screen in Click Team Fusion, you can find a date that's hidden off screen. 08/17/1995. August 17th of 1995. When I first saw this, I thought that it was an absolute game changer. Not only is this a date within the time frame that we just established, but if we look it up on a calendar, we can find that the 17th of August in 1995 was a Thursday. And according to schedule theory, Night 2 also takes place on a Thursday. So for a little while there, I thought that I'd solved not only the time frame, but the exact dates that Sister Location takes place on. It's even an answer that I think most people could realistically believe that Scott came up with at this point in time, so it doesn't even sound insane like some of the more mainstream theories. And then I found out that it meant nothing. Because while nothing that I just said was untrue, it unfortunately doesn't matter, because August 17th, 1995 isn't some date that Scott just decided to hide in an image. It's just the default date of a date and time object in ClickTeam Fusion. It actually has nothing to do with FNaF at all. That's just there by default. You can't even change the date to my understanding. So this technically means absolutely nothing. Like I said, it's both interesting and incredibly misleading. It's just how ClickTeam Fusion works. Just for clarification, this is something that me and my partner went in and found out on our own. She loaded up a completely fresh, empty ClickTeam project and put in a date object. August 17th, 1995 was the date shown. I'm saying this because I don't want people to think that I'm just going off of information that I got on some wiki for this, because all of the information that I found about this online was pretty unreliable and not explained well whatsoever. That said, if you want it to count for anything, as far as I can tell, there is nothing wrong with applying this date to Sister Location. It still lines up perfectly with everything, and would mean that the events of the base game of Sister Location take place between the 16th and the 20th of August in 1995. Personally, I'm not going to use these dates for theorizing. I can't do that in good faith. However, I am going to headcanon these as accurate dates, because why the hell else would this be here? Look, I get that it's a default date in ClickTeam that can't be changed, but look at the context that it pops up in. You have to hold 2 buttons on your keyboard for 83 seconds to see a weird Easter egg screen that led people to decompile the game and find the date that way. This Easter egg serves literally no other purpose as far as I can tell. So, literally, why else would this exist, if not for someone to dig into the code and see that date? Maybe I'm grasping at straws. I probably am, really, but I'm allowed a little bit of a crash at every once in a while. Just a teensy little bit. As a little bonus, based on the alarming amount of research we've done into body preservation here on the channel, thanks Toby Fox, I can confidently say that Michael Afton's body would have turned to the state that it is in probably within a week, or at the very least, before the month of August would have ended, given it's the height of summer. Therefore, if you want to apply this date to the game, everything we see in Sister Location and its custom night, with the exception of the Circus Baby minigame, the interview at the start of the game, and the cutscene of Springtrap in a burnt-down Fazbear's Fright, happens during the month of August in 1995, from Wednesday the 16th and onward. Now, I've brought up schedule theory quite a few times in this segment of the video, so I'm going to take this chance to talk about it a bit more in depth, because after thinking on it for a while, I have a lot of things to say. For those of you who don't remember, schedule theory is a theory posted by T-Dreads last year, and me and my partner directly helped with it. And personally, I've been in full agreement with it for a long time. It's a very well done video that rightfully received a lot of praise. However, upon further inspection, I found a flaw in it that's pretty glaring. One that I legitimately don't know how any of us missed. It's directly stated in the video that we shock both Ballora and Funtime Foxy on Night 3. This would line up perfectly with the schedule, especially considering we don't have to shock Baby or Funtime Freddy on this night. There's just one problem. We don't shock Ballora or Funtime Foxy. We check on them, and then Hand Unit just tells us, yeah, good job, and we go on to the next task. Like I said, I don't know how we all missed that. We all just kinda screwed up there. And to go even further with this, under schedule theory, we don't do nearly enough shocking. If our first workday is Wednesday, and we're supposed to shock every night after an animatronic is booked, then we should shock a total of 9 times throughout the game. We only do half of that. On night 1, we shock Baby, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy. That all lines up. On night 2, things immediately fall apart. According to the schedule and our understanding of it, we should be tasked with shocking all of the animatronics on this night, but we don't. We shock Ballora, but we never check on her like we did yesterday. Then we proceed to not shock Funtime Foxy after checking on him, despite the fact that she's doing the exact same thing as Ballora. We then try to shock Baby, but there's a problem with the power, and we don't even get the chance to try shocking Funtime Freddy. On night 3, we're supposed to be shocking both Ballora and Funtime Foxy. However, as I stated earlier, we don't even try doing that. We check on them, see that they're not doing anything that they're supposed to be doing, and then completely ignore them and move on. On night 2, we at least had the potential excuse of everything being all wonky on that night to justify why we might not have shocked Funtime Foxy or Circus Baby. But that doesn't apply here. Off rip, I think that this is already pretty damning. But unfortunately, there's more to talk about with it. Let's talk about the thing that got us talking about Sister Location that night in the first place. The guts sound. For context, on night 5 of Sister Location, there's 2 bits of ambience you can hear in parts and service. Drips.wav and guts.wav. Fair warning, these sounds pretty gross. This sound actually isn't exclusive to night 5. It plays any time that you're in parts and service, even on night 3. The same cannot be said for the other sound effect. This sound effect only starts to play when you open up the keypad that's in Baby's head. The fact that you can hear blood squelching and bones crunching here, and the fact that it's literally called guts, makes me think that this is exactly what it sounds like. I think that on night 5, when Baby says that there's something bad inside of her, she means it. I think that a child is literally inside of her at this moment. Except there's one teensy tiny issue with that. She can't store children inside of her. This is something that I'll explain in a bit more detail later in the video, but to get my point across now, when Baby grabs a kid, they just die. She doesn't have a storage tank inside of her to keep them alive. They get dragged in and presumably get crushed. This is exactly what happened to Elizabeth.
There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment. Then other children rushed in again, but they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement. I still hear her sometimes.
If Baby grabbed a child recently, then that child will ultimately become a part of her, be it through remnant or agony. And I don't think that Baby wants that. Baby is more sentient than the rest of the animatronics, and I think that's due to the fact that she's only haunted by one child, unlike the rest of the Funtimes who appear to be a smorgasbord of different children's souls, should Funtime/Molten MCI be true. But if another child were to become a part of her, well, that would actively screw that up. So what do? Exactly what Baby says. We save what is good. I think that by taking Baby's chip out of her, we're actively preserving Baby in her current state. That chip is her, and by putting it into Hand Unit, we're making sure that she stays exactly the way that she is, without letting another child intrude on her. So, why am I talking about this? Why is that even relevant to schedule theory? Well, because of time. I can only assume that Baby killed this child during the private booking on the schedule, and, well, under schedule theory, that would have been before the events of Night 4. With that much time passing, Baby would have all of that kid's remnant as a part of her for sure. So, again, I think that something about schedule theory doesn't really line up. Now, as a final note, I want to clear something up about guts.wav real quick. The sound effect follows you when you leave parts and service. It's hard to pinpoint an exact reason for that because it makes no sense for it to keep going once Baby is gone. It even persists throughout Funtime Auditorium. You might think that the noise is actually coming from Ennard. I disagree for one big reason. Ennard already has his own associated sound effect titled Strange Voice. This sound effect stops when you leave parts in service, and starts playing again in Funtime Auditorium when Ennard gets close to you. If Scott is muting one of Ennard's sound effects, why doesn't he mute the other one as well? Quite frankly, there's no way for us to say for sure what the right answer is. But I'm inclined to believe that, since Strange Voice seems to be the sound effect associated with Ennard, and that this sound effect plays during the final scene of the game, with Micah looking in a mirror while Guts doesn't, Guts is not directly associated with Ennard. I fully believe that it was supposed to stop when you enter Funtime Auditorium, but it's impossible to say for sure. Speaking of the Guts sound effect, it technically plays twice during the game. One, as I said, is when Baby's numpad is revealed. The other time, however, is when Mike gets scooped, except there's a problem. It's technically the same sounds, but also technically different. Rather than Guts, a 22-second audio clip, we hear something called Swiftly, a 3-second audio clip. And audibly, these noises are a bit different. That said, if you go into the files and look at them, you'll see that they have the exact same title in the file description. This tells me that these two files came from the same place, and according to the Ultimate Scott Games sound spreadsheet, which is a Google Doc that tries to identify every single sound that Scott uses in some of his older games, this is true. I believe that Swiftly is actually a sped up cutout of Guts, which would also explain the name. So what this means is that the same sound effect that plays when Mike gets scooped plays when you reveal Baby's keypad. This could give an extra bit of credence toward the idea that Baby legitimately has a dead body inside of her, in case anyone still wasn't on board with that. And with that, we're still not done, because I have one more thing to explain with schedule theory. But don't worry, this one's a lot faster. On night 3, Hand Unit tells us this.
Due to unforeseen malfunctions from today's shows, your nightly duties will require you to perform maintenance that you may or may not be skilled enough to perform. It became necessary for technicians to attempt to disconnect Funtime Freddy's power module. However, they were unsuccessful.
Note the words today's shows. This doesn't line up with Funtime Freddy's schedule at all, because if you take a look, it says that he was available today. The explanation given in the original video for this was that it was an in-house party, but I don't think that Funtime Freddy would be shown as available under those circumstances. After all, he's not available if he's at a party, be it in-house or not. With everything that I just said in mind, I think that schedule theory is fundamentally flawed. I'm sure I'm not the only person who noticed these things. It's kind of obvious when you look at it. Which is why I'm so confused by the fact that none of us picked this up when it happened. Like, seriously, what the hell were any of us doing? Now, those are, for the most part, objective flaws that I have with a theory. I don't really like to use that word when it comes to theories, but this is one of those unfortunate times where I think that it applies. However, I also have a much more subjective issue with something stated in this video. The video states that the controlled shocks happen because of the remnant inside of the Funtimes, that it gets disturbed by interacting with new children, and we reset it by administering a controlled shock. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the world when it comes to the inner workings of Remnant, but I'm fairly certain that this isn't the answer. The reason that I'm so confident in this is because of the fact that these shocks come back in FNaF 6, and the animatronics that we use it on really aren't associating with children at this point in the timeline. I imagine none of them have actually interacted with kids in the past decade at least, save maybe for Lefty since you can put him on stage. So I don't think that we're shocking animatronics because of a disturbance in their remnant thanks to interacting with children. So what could the reason actually be? Well, looking at FNaF 6, the reason that we shock the animatronics in the salvage sections is to reset their aggression. I'll probably go a bit more in depth on this when I eventually get to that video, but to keep a long story short, shocking an animatronic resets the regression level back to 0, which lines up with what Henry says at this point.
Remember, use your company-issued taser to return the animatronic to a neutral state if you feel that it's becoming unstable or aggressive.
We literally see this in action. Shocking the animatronics actively saves your life in this game. And as a small bonus note, Henry specifically tells you not to shock the animatronics more than 3 times if you can avoid it, because that would damage the animatronic. I believe that this is why you never try to shock an animatronic more than 3 times in a row in Sister Location. Look at Baby on night 1 for example. No matter how many times you shock her, nothing changes. But after the 3rd shock, Hand Unit just says that everything is fine. Now this isn't to say that the shock doesn't have an effect on the remnant inside of these animatronics at all, because it definitely does. After all, in FNaF 6, the animatronic has to build back up from 0 after the shock. If there was no effect on the remnant whatsoever, then I think it would jump right back to whatever it was at before. I personally think that the controlled shock inflicts a bit of a mental shock. The shock is a little bit of a setback, but not a full reset for the remnant inside of the machines, while the animatronics themselves do get fully reset. Or at least, it seems like they're supposed to be getting reset. Jury's still out on if that actually works. So, clearly, I have some issues with schedule theory. However, a lot of it seems so solid that I struggle to just throw it away. Thankfully, I don't need to, because my partner, who was also present for the inception of schedule theory, came up with an idea to fix that right up. And all we have to do is move everything slightly to the left. When we came up with schedule theory, we were under the impression that we came in the night after the events of the day. So, for example, on night 1, we assumed that we entered the building after the events of Wednesday, and that we were shocking animatronics after their performances. But if you take a listen to what Hand Unit says after you administer your first controlled shock...
Excellent. Ballora is feeling like her old self again, and will be ready to perform again tomorrow.
The words, ready to perform again tomorrow, imply to me that instead of shocking someone after they do something, we're shocking them before they're scheduled to do something, to prepare them for the events of tomorrow, or, in Hand Unit's own words, to motivate them. So let's take a look at this schedule again with a bit of a new perspective. Rather than assuming that night 1 takes place on Wednesday night, let's instead assume that it takes place on Tuesday night, and adjust the rest of the schedule accordingly. We'll take a look at this graphic that my partner made for reference. Night 1 is the exact same, so we can skip over that. But on night 2, things get a bit more interesting, specifically with Funtime Freddy. He's booked for a show tomorrow, so as I'm sure you might expect, he's meant to be charging right now to prepare for it. But when something goes wrong with the power, we have to go to the breaker room to fix it. And when we go there, we actively disturb Funtime Freddy's charging period, because this is his room, and that thing back there is his charging pad. This gets backed up when you pay closer attention to some of Bonbon's voice lines on this night.
Shh! Go back to your stage! Everything is okay. Shh! It's bedtime! Let's go back to our stage.
Bonbon is telling Funtime Freddy to return to his stage here, and to rest. And the closest thing to a stage is this small pad right here. I think that this is where Funtime Freddy is meant to charge, and that this is how he and the rest of the Funtimes prepare for their shows. But while we're there, Funtime Freddy doesn't wait and charge. He's entirely active the whole time, and because of that, he doesn't get enough rest to act properly for his show, which is why things go bad on the following day, at the show that he's booked for. This version of the schedule also helps with the guts issue that I mentioned earlier. Having a dead child inside of Circus Baby for over 24 hours feels like an insane stretch. I think that would have completely screwed with her. But here, that period of time is much shorter. I find it infinitely more reasonable like this, especially considering that Baby doesn't say a damn thing about it on night 4. And also the fact that, according to Hand Unit,
your task today will involve more maintenance work. Circus Baby had a rough day and is in need of repair.
I don't know about you, but I can't imagine that she had a rough day and that something was bad inside of her after a day of routine maintenance. It just makes more sense if, instead, this sequence was after the private party that we see booked on the schedule. And just as a quick side note, I think that private parties might be in-house parties. As I stated earlier in the recap, it's fairly implied that there are times where kids are allowed into the bunker. Honestly, I can't imagine what else these private bookings would be, but I think that it makes a lot more sense for a child to go missing in a deep, dark underground bunker than at a sunny backyard party where everyone is always together. It just makes more sense like this to me. That sums up my thoughts on schedule theory. I still really like the theory, but after reviewing it, yeah, there were definitely some flaws with it. But I think that the suggestions that I've laid out in this video fix most of the flaws that I personally had with it. And there's still a lot more to schedule theory that I find rather interesting and don't take issue with, so please, go check that video out if you haven't yet, which I'm imagining most of you have because it kinda blew up. But before we continue, there's something to bring up. For those of you who have been paying close attention to this segment, you might have noticed something. While this new version of schedule theory might explain most of the issues away that I have with it, it doesn't explain the biggest issue, the controlled shocks. We still aren't shocking these animatronics nearly enough for it to line up with any kind of schedule we have available to us. So, was this all for nothing? No, not at all. You see, I think that the shocks are a bit of a different issue entirely, one that can't be explained through a schedule, but instead through the character that has been trying to kill us for the entire game. So let's pivot away from schedule theory now, and talk about one of the most interesting characters in Sister Location, Hand Unit, or should I say, F10N4. For anyone watching this that isn't caught up with the most recent entries into the series, allow me to fill you in. F10N4 is the original Mimic 1 AI that Edwin made, otherwise known as M1, which we see mimicking Edwin's late wife, Fiona. Sometime after the death of David Murray, M1 was transferred from the actual Mimic endoskeleton and put into this giant supercomputer looking thing that we can find underneath Murray's costume manor. How did this happen? I don't know. I didn't like Secret of the Mimic that much, and I haven't bothered looking into it again since it came out. I can't even bring myself to watch Markiplier play the game, but the how or why don't really matter for this video. That's another thing entirely that someone has probably made a video on before. What does matter though, is the fact that F10 almost certainly has something to do with Sister Location. Why? Well, to start, let's address the burger in the room. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Fazburger by now, but if you're not, essentially, the theory is that almost all of the locations that we see in these games are being built on top of each other. I don't think that they're all in the exact same spot, but they're definitely all connected. The FNaF 6 pizza place is underneath the Pizzaplex, and so is the Scooper. And since the Scooper is right underneath the Pizzaplex, and Mike's room is in the Pizzaplex, yeah, I don't think that the Sister Location bunker is excluded from this at all, especially with the whole dead body in the vents thing connecting to the week before. All of this paired with the fact that William Afton definitely claimed this land and MCM sometime after the events of Secret of the Mimic, especially evident by the fact that Edwin's home is a house on a hill with the FNaF 4 nightmare bedroom in it. Yeah, literally all of this is connected to Sister Location. If you were wondering why I felt the need to talk about the distinction between Retcons and Scottcons earlier in this video, now you know. More on point. Underneath Murray's costume manor, there's an underground tunnel that we can travel through. A tunnel that, when you go through it, literally plays a song with the motif from Watch Your 6, which plays in Sister Location when you enter the private office and face off against Ennard. That's not an accident. And considering your access point to this underground tunnel is directly connected to where F10 is, yeah, she's close by. And throughout Secret of the Mimic, F10 spends 90% of the game pretending to be Dispatch, which is the same voice as Hand Unit. So realistically speaking, the chances of F10 being Hand Unit are extremely high. I'd legitimately be surprised if this wasn't the case. So now that we've identified Hand Unit as F10, let's talk about what they actually do throughout this game. They try to kill you. She talks out loud when you're supposed to be quiet in Ballora Gallery, only minutes after telling you to sprint through the room. Both of these things only accomplish one thing: putting your life at risk. She also tells you to use your flash beacon as sparingly as possible in Funtime Auditorium on the next night. Fun fact, the best way you can get through this room is by using the flash beacon as much as you possibly can. On top of trying to get you killed, F10 also seems to completely disregard whenever something is wrong, unless it's to reprimand you in some way. Ballora being on pieces on her stage in Night 3? Totally fine. Funtime Foxy not being on her stage, even though that's an active safety measure in place to make sure that he doesn't hurt anyone? No, nothing wrong there. Michael literally not leaving the bunker on Night 3, being trapped in a springlock suit all night and then coming back the next day? He was just feeling off. And don't even get me started on the fact that she sees nothing wrong with there being people literally hanging by the neck. Probably the two technicians that we saw the night prior. It's completely absurd. So yeah, something is going on here. And personally, I can't see an explanation for this that doesn't end with F10 wanting to kill Mike. So the question is, why? Why is she doing any of this? Well, that's where things get kinda tricky. You see, in Secret of the Mimic, F10's motivations are actually laid out pretty clearly. She has one goal: to fix David through M2. That's what she wants throughout the whole game, and she uses Arnold to get closer to that goal. And look, she doesn't even try harming Arnold for most of the game. Only when Arnold starts disobeying her in the final act of the game does she start to show her true colors. And even then, most of her threats boil down to, this robot is murdering people and you will be next if you don't get me what I want. I don't even think that she's being inherently malicious with that. She just really wants her son back. I genuinely believe that if Arnold got away scot-free after giving her the data diver, she wouldn't have cared. But none of that applies here. Mike has absolutely nothing to do with that situation, and yet F10 is still trying to kill him throughout the game. Why? Well, I can think of a few possible answers to this, but they're all kind of shaky in essence. Let's go down the list. One answer could be the fact that, much like the animatronics, F10 is also under the impression that Mike is William. I have quite a few issues with this one. First of all, I'm assuming that F10 is quite familiar with William by this point in time, so I'd be surprised if she looked at Michael and thought that they were the same person, even if they look similar, especially since William is probably really old by this point, and Mike is not. After all, F10 has cameras throughout the building, so she could have gotten a pretty good look at Michael in this game. Not to mention the fact that Mike being asked what his name is one of the first things that happens in this game. Though, more on that note, there's a chance that William, being the person that he is, essentially manipulated F10. Clearly, she's running the whole operation down here, and I wouldn't be surprised if William got her to do this under the premise that William would give her the one thing that she wants most: David. But I'm sure, as we all know, William didn't do that. Even in a hypothetical God David world, by this point in the timeline there is no child alive that could fit the role of David. So I wouldn't be all too surprised if F10 is more or less just lashing out by trying to get Mike killed. That's the more emotional answer here, which is okay, I guess. Assuming that F10 is Fiona's ghost, which I'm pretty sure most people agree with. To some extent, at least. It's been so long and I haven't looked into this since the game came out, so blech. That aside, what's the other option that I have? Well, what if she's trying to keep the Funtime animatronics down there? I have a feeling that she'd be fairly well aware of the fact that they're trying to get out, and I don't think that F10 would be all too happy about that. Her characterization in Secret of the Mimic definitely painted her as someone that is willing to let people die to protect herself and her son. So, would she be willing to let Mike die to protect anyone else from William's robots stepping foot into the outside world? Maybe? But also, if she's running the whole facility, doesn't that mean that she could theoretically shut it down completely to avoid this ever being a possibility? I imagine that if she was just trying to stop the Funtimes from getting out, there's a much easier way to avoid this issue besides killing everyone that works for Fazbear Entertainment that comes down here. If you're anything like me, you're probably not very satisfied with these answers either. And honestly, I don't blame you. I'm very confident that Hand Unit is trying to kill Mike throughout the game, be it directly or indirectly. And I also feel very confident that Hand Unit having the voice that F10 mimics throughout Secret of the Mimic, paired with the fact that we're in an underground bunker in the same general area that F10 was in, makes a pretty strong case for Hand Unit and F10 being the same. But when you get into potential character motivations, into explanations on why F10 does the things that she does in Sister Location, everything kinda falls on its face, which is kinda par for the course for the series sometimes, but you get what I mean. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for this. But if anyone wants to do my job for me and tell me what they think in the comments, I'm not gonna complain. Now, since we're already talking about things relating to Secret of the Mimic, let's address the other massive connection that even more people draw between these two games. The idea that the Funtime animatronics have mimic tech. This is one of those theories that's existed for a long time, and seems to get a bit stronger every time that we get a new release. The Funtime animatronics are, to some extent, imbued with the technology from the Mimic, or more specifically, from Edwin. Voice mimicking and learning, in particular, are things that are key components of the Mimic, and we can see the Funtimes doing the same thing. So, case closed, William stole the blueprints and made himself 4 stylized mimics, right? Well, no, not exactly. You see, while all of the Funtimes can do certain things only seen in the Mimic, none of them have full access to everything that Mimic was capable of. Funtime Freddy is the only animatronic with actual voice mimicking, while Funtime Foxy is only capable of replaying audio. Baby specifically says that she is capable of learning, while Ballora isn't. And all of the animatronics, even when they're just endoskeletons, if you can even call them that in this game, are able to take a physical form capable of standing on 2 feet. These are all things that are directly associated with the Mimic, but as you can see, none of these animatronics are able to do all of these things on their own. Despite the fact that William claimed all of Edwin's property, he still can't recreate the Mimic to its full potential. Why is that? The easiest answer is that William is just a total fraud. We can literally just say that William was not as good as Edwin when it came to building robots, and so Edwin was able to give Mimic infinitely more features than William ever could for any of his robots. And while I do believe that this is 100% true, because let's face it, William kind of sucks at everything that he does, I don't think that this is the ultimate answer. I think that there's a bit more at play than just this. Another fairly believable answer is that William never got his hands on the data diver after Secret of the Mimic, or the Mimic 1 AI. After all, we still don't actually know which ending is the canon one. If, hypothetically speaking, William didn't get the AI that Edwin used, then, at best, he'd have to get by with the singular functionalities that different Murray products have. Voice mimicking could come from the Mycelium Men, a learning program could come from the Stay Up Latte, the ability to change shapes from the Magic Coat Rack, and things like that. I actually like both of these ideas, and realistically speaking, I wouldn't be surprised if either of them were true, or a mix of both of them. However, the answer that I lean toward most is neither of them, but a not-so-secret third thing, Remnant. As I've stated multiple times on this channel, I fully believe that David is haunting the Mimic. I really don't know how you can get any other kind of explanation from the secret ending of the game, where we literally see a kid's soul fight against the programming of the machine that he's tethered to, especially considering F10's insistence on fixing him. On this note, I have a theory. I believe that an animatronic/endoskeleton that's possessed by only one person's remnant is a lot more focused and capable than one that's possessed by multiple. Or more specifically, in the case of the Funtimes, ones that are possessed by various different splits of their remnant, assuming that Molten/Funtime MCI is true. I've brought this up a few times in this video by now, but just in case you've forgotten, Funtime's MCI is the theory that the events of FNaF 3's Follow Me are William Afton tearing apart the animatronics that are possessed by the spirits of the MCI, then melting down their metal to get Remnant and injecting it into the Funtimes, spreading it across all of them with the exception of Baby. This then becomes Molten MCI, which is the same thing, but by FNaF 6, they're all a part of Molten Freddy instead, following Circus Baby being ejected. As much as I dislike certain aspects of this theory and the implications that it has, I have nothing to disprove it. That said, I think that if this is true, then I think that all of the fun times are a bit more unfocused. None of them have the full remnant of one child inside of them. They're all a combination of different kids. But Circus Baby, on the other hand, isn't affected by this, because as we all know, Circus Baby is only possessed by exactly one child, Elizabeth. I think this might be the reason that she seems so much more focused and capable than the rest of the fun times, because thanks to where her remnant comes from, she is. This also plays into something that I brought up earlier, the idea of there being another child inside of her on night 5 of Sister Location. I think that if everything I just said is true, and Baby is aware of it as I think she is, then I don't think she likes the idea of having another child's remnant as a part of her. I think that this is the best explanation for her asking Mike to, quote, save what is good on night 5. I think that this chip contains herself, Circus Baby's AI mixed with Elizabeth's remnant. I think that she copied herself here to avoid what happened to the fun times happening to her. Honestly, this might be the reason why her loyalties to William were still so strong in FNaF 6. After being ejected from ennard, she clearly got her hands on a few spare parts. I mean, she somehow got her entire face back, so I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that she, at some point, went back down to the bunker. And if she did, then I think that it's entirely reasonable that she could have gotten her hands on that chip again. I think that a lot of people overthink what this chip is, especially because you can see something pretty similar inside of Helpy and Help Wanted 2. I think that this is actually where Baby's personality is stored, and probably her remnant too. I honestly think that most animatronics have a chip in them of some kind that stores those things, especially the ones that we see later in the series. I have a whole video going over that on the channel already, so if you want a full breakdown, go check it out in the guide card. But to keep a long story short, I think that Baby's personality, and perhaps Elizabeth's remnant, is all stored on this chip, and I don't think it's some game-breaking lore clue like some people do. Now before we move on, there's something that I feel the need to address before someone else does. Earlier, I went on about how endoskeletons that are infused with the remnant of multiple people are less capable than ones that are infused with the entirety of a child's remnant. So what's the deal with ennard? Why would Circus Baby want to become ennard and risk losing some control over herself? To this, I have two things to say. One, I think that for Baby, getting out of the bunker was her absolute biggest priority. While it might be true that becoming ennard could have included a risk to the control that she has over herself, I think that it was a risk she was willing to take for the sake of getting out. And two, I don't think that this is how ennard exactly works. Since Baby was able to be ejected from ennard at some point after the events of Sister Location, I think that all of the individual fun times were, at least to some extent, still separate entities, even while they were all conjoined. And because of this, I don't think that becoming a part of ennard affected the amount of control Baby had over herself, unlike what could have happened to her if she had another dead child's remnant inside of her animatronic shell, which absolutely could have messed with her control. We've been focusing on Circus Baby for a while now, but I want to go on about her for a little bit longer, because honestly, I think we're all kind of underestimating how powerful she is. Mimic 1, the program that allows the Mimic to do everything that it does in this series, at its core is a learning program. It's capable of storing and quote-unquote learning information. And on night 4, Baby tells us,
There's something very important that I've learned how to do over time. Do you know what that is? How to pretend. Do you ever play make-believe? Pretend to be one way when you are really the other? It's very important. But Laura never learns. But I do.
This is one of the bigger points of evidence toward Baby being functionally similar to the mimic, because learning how to pretend is, well, that's literally what a mimic is. It's something that learns how to pretend to be something else. But when it comes to how powerful Baby actually is, there's something else that we need to talk about. The fact that she has just as much, if not more, influence over things in the bunker than F10 does. If you recall, on night 3, F10 deliberately tells us that there's no need for us to check on Baby, and actively tells us not to enter, quote, unauthorized areas. And yet, the vent door to her area opens up. The vent door to Ballora Gallery doesn't open up, but Baby's does. The room that F10 deliberately tells us that we shouldn't go into. F10 has no reason to do this. If she doesn't want us in there, then she would block off our access to it, not give us the direct way inside. And yet, this vent door opens. Why? Well, I think it's because F10 isn't the one opening it. I think that Baby did it. I think that Baby has at least some amount of control over the bunker. I think that she opens this door entirely on her own, for a chance to manipulate Mike even further with a story about what happened to the young girl from the only day that she was on stage. Don't believe me? I understand why. How could Circus Baby be controlling parts of the facility itself? Well, look at night 5. On this night, there are 2 separate instances of F10 trying to talk to us, trying to give us instructions, and being completely cut off by Circus Baby, so that she can be the one to talk. This is, in every regard, her directly taking control over the facility to some extent. There's no other explanation for her being able to completely silence F10 like that. So, Circus Baby is very capable, infinitely more than the rest of the Funtime animatronics. But is she the mimic? No, she's definitely not the mimic. But I think that if any of the animatronics do have full access to the Mimic 1 program, it's her. She's the only one of these animatronics that seems to properly learn, and she very clearly has an agenda of her own. So, me, personally, this is a theory that I do believe in. Now that we've talked about Circus Baby for a while, let's get through the rest of the animatronics real fast too. I think that the Funtime animatronics are easily the most complicated group of animatronics of the Scott Games era, for reasons that I've laid out throughout this video already. But one thing that we know about them for certain is that throughout the entire game, the Funtimes are trying to kill Mike. Every single interaction you have with Ballora, Funtime Foxy, or Funtime Freddy can turn lethal in a heartbeat. But the thing is, that kinda doesn't make sense. I think we were so used to the fact that all of these animatronics have been trying to kill us in all of these games, that we've kind of written off the Funtimes entirely in this regard. Because, well, look at the ending of the game. They need Mike alive. Baby's entire plan revolves around Mike being alive so that she and the rest of the Funtimes can escape the bunker. But if the Funtimes kill Mike, then that entire plan goes out the window, doesn't it? This leads me to one of a few conclusions, one of which being that the Funtimes are just straight up murderous. I get why some people would believe this, but since these animatronics are getting rented out to parties as regularly as they are, and this place hasn't been shut down for a bunch of mass murdering animatronics that are going on a killing spree at every birthday party that they attend, I don't think that that's the answer. The other option, however, is much more likely. The Funtimes are specifically trying to kill Mike here because, as Mike says at the end of Custom Night,
"They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you."
Now this could either mean that the scattered spirits of the MCI are recognizing this man as their killer and are trying to get him, or it's F10 recognizing him and controlling them so that they try to kill him. Either explanation works here, it's just a matter of whether or not you agree with my claims on F10. But at the very least, I think that we can all agree that the Funtimes are trying to kill Mike because he's being confused for William. But Baby is the exception. Baby doesn't try to kill Mike, at least not until night 5, but that's for a decidedly different reason than everyone else. But not only does she not try to kill Mike, she actively stops the rest of the Funtimes from doing it. On night 3, Funtime Foxy jumps Mike, and our screen turns to static. And the next thing we know, Circus Baby is speaking, telling Mike that she kidnapped him. And then again on night 5, Ballora is following Mike around, ready to kill him if he makes even a slightly wrong move. But the whole way through, Baby is the one stopping her, the one that's somehow managing to convince Ballora not to attack him. What I'm getting at is the fact that, just like the facility itself, I think that Circus Baby actually has influence over the other animatronics. And my proof comes from the blueprints. If we take a look at Funtime Foxy's blueprints, we find something really weird here. Remote floor anchor. On its own, that doesn't really make sense. Why would he have that? Why can she be anchored to the floor? Well, that becomes a bit more interesting when you see the line right underneath it that says, "See Circus Baby DIR07. It's not that Funtime Foxy can anchor themselves to the floor, it's that Baby can anchor it to the floor. Similarly, Baby also has some kind of control over Ballora. Look at this. Deter and misdirect remote activation. See Circus Baby DIR07. This tells me that Baby has some control over Ballora. As for what deter and misdirect actually means, that's a great question. Maybe it means that she can get Ballora to deter and misdirect others. Or maybe it means that Baby is capable of deterring and misdirecting Ballora herself. It's really unclear, but one thing for certain is that Baby's the one in control of it. This might be why Baby's blueprints seem to have nothing on them, because her capabilities aren't really about what she herself can do, it's about what she can make others do. So yeah, Baby has some level of influence and control over the Funtimes. At least 2 of them. Funtime Freddy, however, has nothing like this. There's nothing listed here that gives Baby any control over him. He's just there. I think that this might be the reason that Funtime Freddy seems to be the one in control of Molten Freddy later in the timeline, because he's the only one who wasn't programmed to blindly listen to Baby. He's the only one that Baby can't directly stop. Speaking of things unique to Funtime Freddy though, he's also the only one of these animatronics that seems capable of actually kidnapping a child. Not only does he have a storage tank inside of him to store children in, but he also has parental tracking, a proximity sensor, and the ability to mimic voices and allure people. He actually has all of the tools entirely on his own. And before you bring up what Baby did to Elizabeth, that wasn't a kidnapping, that was a murder. According to Baby, Elizabeth was screaming for only a moment, and then presumably stopped. I brought this up earlier in the video in case this sounds familiar. It's kinda hard to make a video this long without the need to repeat myself, unfortunately. But to summarize, I don't think that Baby is capable of storing living kids inside of her. Once she grabs one, they're just gone. Hypothetically speaking, if Funtime Foxy or Ballora could grab kids, I think it'd have a similar effect to Baby trying it, because they also don't have a storage tank. That's only Freddy. Something funny to note about this is the fact that across multiple continuities now, Freddy has a bit of a history of grabbing someone and storing them inside of him. Glamrock Freddy does this with Gregory in Security Breach, Twisted Freddy does it to Charlie in The Twisted Ones, and Funtime Freddy seems to not only do it in Sister Location, but also does it to Millie in Count the Ways from Fazbear Frights. And in all of these examples, the person being stored inside of Freddy survives. Except for Millie, but like her death is separate from that. I think this might be the reason that of all of the main 4 animatronics in Sister Location, Funtime Freddy is the one you can't shock. I think that he's the one that's meant to be kidnapping children alive, and that if we were to shock him, well, we'd directly harm, if not kill, whatever kid is being stored inside of him at that moment. There would be no point in Funtime Freddy kidnapping a child alive if they were just going to die before being removed from the animatronic, after all. Now, when it comes to the animatronics, there's only one more thing that I want to say about them here. As you all know, Baby was, allegedly, made for Elizabeth, which some people have taken to mean that Baby was made for the purpose of killing Elizabeth. That's wrong. I'm not gonna argue with you, you're wrong. Back on point, Baby was made for Elizabeth, and as I'll get into a little bit later, Ballora was almost certainly made with Mrs. Afton in mind. People have tried to push this to say that every member of the Afton family was represented in some regard down here, apart from William himself, with Funtime Foxy meant to represent Mike, and Funtime Freddy meant to represent the crying child. I don't particularly agree with this, mostly because I think connecting Cece to Funtime Freddy is kind of a hard sell, and I also think that William just wouldn't do this, but maybe Scott did it on purpose for that reason. That's always possible. That said, there's also a few other little creatures scattered around the bunker. There's a little magician creature that might be meant to represent William, which would make some level of sense, especially considering that there seems to be a magician-esque figure at the staff bot table that seems to be recreating the Aftons. There's also this guy on puppet strings, which you could connect to Mike pretty easily, considering that poster in the FNaF 6 alleyway that seems to represent the Afton family in some regard. Unfortunately, there's nothing to connect the crying child to here. But hey, at least he has the Fredbear plush in the private office. We'll talk about that thing later. And that's almost it for the animatronics. There's still the matter of Lolbit and Yendo, which, well, they certainly exist. Look, I'm gonna level with you. There's absolutely no chance in hell that I'm gonna try painting some level of importance to these two, because nobody is. Maybe there's some hidden, untapped lore that none of us have discovered, like what Scott said about the Endo O2s. Before the movie came out and everyone realized that me and my partner were spot on with what we said about them being Springlocks in a video that came out months before he even said that. Anyway, on a whim, I asked my stream chat a few weeks ago what they thought about Lolbit and Yendo. And they said, let's see here. Lolbit is a time traveler who went back in time to be a part of a comedy duo with Funtime Foxy. And Yendo is, L-Chip. You know what? Fuck it, we're calling that canon now. Something else that was brought up to me on stream that's slightly less cursed is the possibility of Edwin being more involved with this game than we thought. Namely, the idea of him being the person who actually built these animatronics. This could explain how they have any amount of mimic-adjacent functionality built into them, and could also place him as the desk man from FNaF World. I haven't thought about this nearly enough to actually go further in depth on it in this video, but I'm willing to do some research and to make a video entirely dedicated to it if people are interested in the idea. So if you want me to do some digging, let me know in the comments below. And if you want me to explore any of your other crazy ideas, tell me in the comments anyway, but you'll have much better luck getting me to talk about it if you tell me on stream. Trust me, it's a lot easier to read stream chats than it is to go through a few hundred comments. And with that, we're done talking about the animatronics. Definitely. There is absolutely nobody else to talk about. Definitely. 100%. We did it. Okay, fine. We'll talk about the Springlock suit. The Night Force Springlock suit is interesting, because I think that a lot of people legitimately gave up on trying to figure out what it is for a while. We were given no hints, and Scott refused to tell us anything about it. So we were kinda just left grasping at straws until we gave up. The only thing that we all agreed on was that this suit was more than likely the out-of-service animatronic that we can see on the schedule. But that's it. So let's see what we can do now. What animatronic can this be? Obviously, it's not any of the Funtime animatronics that we can see in this game, though they are inherently similar due to how the faceplates open. Apart from being similar to the Funtimes we see in this game, the only other hint we have is that this thing came from Circus Baby's Pizza World. One thought that was floating through the collective subconscious of the theorist community was the idea that this could be Funtime Chica, which we hadn't seen at the time of Sister Location's release. And then, of course, we did see Funtime Chica in the next game, and looking at these two side by side, I just don't think that the faceplates line up. Funtime Chica very clearly has a beak, which this suit does not have. Now, there definitely is a point to make about Scott saying that he clears things up with his next game, and then showing us a new Funtime in the game right after the one where we see a mysterious animatronic that is inherently similar to the rest of the animatronics. Something else that I've seen floating around before is the idea that this might be Ennard, or more accurately, the animatronic that Ennard's mask originally came from. This is another one that, while interesting, I don't agree with for a number of reasons. For one, we have no idea if this mask was even tied to a specific animatronic before Ennard. Two, we can see Ennard's mask in the main control room of Sister Location, so I don't know why it would suddenly be here instead. And three, again, the faceplates don't match up. Whatever animatronic this is, it's not shaped like any fun time that we've ever seen. Heck, if anything, I think that this mask kind of looks like a marionette mask, considering the general eye shape and the smile. The issue with that, of course, is that none of the marionettes we've ever had have faceplates like this. Security Puppet is almost there, but it only has a vertical line down, not a horizontal one. So ultimately, this doesn't fit either. Not to mention the fact that I don't think a human is fitting inside of this thing. So for years, literal years, we were kinda just stuck. No real direction for what this could possibly be. So we all kinda just forgot about it. And then Secret of the Mimic happened. And we got Jackie. Jackie is very obviously meant to invoke the image of the marionette. She comes out of a wind-up box that plays My Grandfather's Clock, and toward the end of her chase sequences, she has stripes on her arms, tears down her face, she loses her nose, and she even has the Nightmare own jump scare sound effect if she catches you. This isn't subtle at all. What also isn't subtle at all is the fact that by doing a quick side-by-side of Jackie's face and the Night 4 Springlock suit, it is a damn good match. So, case closed, right? This suit is just Jackie, yeah? Well, no, not at all. Jackie kinda got destroyed very early on in Secret of the Mimic, despite being the only thing that Steel will put any effort into marketing for. I don't think that a destroyed animatronic is the answer that we're looking for. So, my answer for this is a little bit more complicated than that. Well, complicated isn't the right word. I actually think it's rather simple. Considering how similar Jackie and the marionette are to each other, I ultimately think that Jackie was the blueprint, the starting point, for the animatronic that would ultimately become the marionette. I think that this is why we never saw Jackie in another game, because her design was completely repurposed and turned into this. But I think that sometime between Jackie and the marionette that we all know and hate, there was another version of it. A version that was still much more in line with the overall clown aesthetic that Jackie has going on, and would fit right in with the vibe of Circus Babies. And I think that that version of Jackie / the marionette is the Springlock suit that Mike finds himself in on Night 4 of Sister Location. A version of Jackie with some slight design alterations. After all, Jackie is more or less a red-headed clown girl, and, well, that's also exactly what Circus Baby is. I think this is the point in time where Jackie's design got its first real change-up. And then, from this point on, I think that the next design based off of this was the security puppet that we see in FNaF 6, as it still has the vertical line down the middle of its face that's very similar to a faceplate. And from there, well, the rest is history that we've already seen. I feel the need to reiterate that Scott didn't specifically have Jackie from Secret of the Mimic planned this many years in advance. I think he just had an idea for a version of the marionette that could have been a Springlock suit that fit the vibe of Circus Babies. And I think this faceplate was used as a design reference for Jackie once her design was being worked on. And for the record, whatever's left of Jackie was still inside of MCM. And according to Fazburger, that's very close by, so this is all fair game. And speaking of Fazburger, there's something that we have to address. It's time to talk about what has legitimately become my least favorite thing in this entire game. The Breaker Room map. I'm not gonna mince words here. I f***ing hate this thing. This singular map has made literally everything more confusing in my life, and I'm not lying when I say that certain aspects of this map are the things that took the longest amount of time for me and my partner to come to a conclusion to. And even now, we don't agree with each other on all of those things. We just know that we both disagree with the more common answers that people have for them. But that's me getting ahead of myself. Before I start crashing out over this thing, I should at least go over what we're actually seeing in it. The Breaker Room map is showing an outdated map of the sister location bunker, the FNAF 4 neighborhood, including Cece's house and Fredbear's family diner, and the FNAF 4 nightmare house. The map is also not to scale. The FNAF 4 neighborhood isn't the same size as Ballora Gallery. The reason that I'm calling this map outdated is because we see Fredbear's on this map, and to my understanding, Fredbear's is a different building by this point in time. I believe that at the very least it became the FNAF 2 building. I also think that it's fairly likely that it became the now abandoned FNAF 1 building, but that specific detail isn't important, just so long as it's not still Fredbear's. The reason for this is the gray dots. Those two gray dots, in some way, shape, or form, represent Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. That's something that all of us can agree on, and I'll get into more specifics a bit later. But for right now, what we have to acknowledge is the fact that there were never two animatronics on stage in either the FNAF 1 or FNAF 2 location. It was always 3, with Foxy and his cove off to the side. So this map has to be a bit outdated, because if Fredbear's family diner became a different building, which I fully believe that it did under Fazburger, then these two dots would mean nothing. Another weird thing about this map are the names on the side. Observatory 1 and 2, the FNAF 4 minigame house, and the FNAF 4 nightmare house. This name implies that these areas are being observed, which simultaneously makes sense and doesn't make sense. Because if you look a little closer, you'll see the plush trap hallway on this map, a hallway that we know is being observed thanks to the fact that we have cameras in the private office. So why isn't this Observatory 3? And speaking of observatories, all 3 of these rooms have a line connecting them to the bunker. Considering that this is an electrical map, I'm inclined to believe that these are power lines. This shows where electricity is going. The little loading icons that you can see on the map during Night 2 are where power is directly being generated by the breaker room. In some instances, these lines make perfect sense, but it's kinda tricky in the other instances. The FNAF 4 Nightmare Room is the easiest one to understand. The power line is being directly connected to where the breaker is, and that's how electricity is being funneled into the room. But the other observatory is a bit more complicated. The power is seemingly being generated within the minigame house, but the actual power line is connected to Fredbear's. So we've got a power line that's not connected to a source of electricity, and a source of electricity not connected to a power line. How do we make sense of this? Believe it or not, I actually think it's pretty simple. Let's start off with Fredbear's. Power line, but no breaker. So how does Fredbear's get any power? I believe that the answer is Circus Gallery, the room on the other side of the power line. Circus Gallery and Circus Control don't both need power being supplied to them. You could try arguing that Circus Control in particular needs a lot of power because it has the controlled shocks, but keep in mind that the hub of the bunker where you perform the rest of the controlled shocks doesn't have a power source listed on this map. So because of this, I think you can pretty safely make the argument that Circus Gallery and Circus Control don't both need their own power supply. And because of this, I think that the power from Circus Gallery, a room where we see literally nothing happen throughout the entire game, is being directly funneled to Fredbear's. Okay, that explained Fredbear's, but what about the FNAF 4 minigame house? We've got a breaker there, but no power line connecting to the house. At least, not there. However, further down the map, we can see the plush trap hallway with a power line connected to it, and no breaker there. I think that the reason for this is because the plush trap hallway is in the FNAF 4 minigame house. Let me break down why. First of all, Observatory 2 is very clearly Edwin's old house, as the FNAF 4 Nightmare Room is David's old room. And something that we've established fairly well by this point in time is the fact that Afton owns multiple houses. I mean, it's not like he was a homeless business owner before claiming Edwin's land after Secret of the Mimic, right? So I think that the house in the FNaF 4 neighborhood was his original home, and that Edwin's old home was the one that he acquired. Now, the thing about Edwin's old home is that we can explore the whole thing, and nowhere in this entire house do we see the plush trap hallway. And it's not like he has some secret third home that we don't know about, so I think that the most logical conclusion to make is that the plush trap hallway is a part of the FNaF 4 minigame house, which we never see the entirety of. Not only would this fix our issue of this house having a breaker but no connecting power line from it to the bunker, it would also explain why the plush trap hallway isn't called Observatory 3, because it's not. It's just a part of Observatory 1, one that's split up on this map that is obviously not to scale. So, we've identified most things going on with this map. Now it's time to talk about the parts of this map that make everyone's head hurt. The dots. There are white dots and there are gray dots. What are they meant to be? Well, let's start with the easier of the two, the gray dots. I imagine most of you are quick to say that these are animatronics, and you're almost right. The issue with this, however, is that there aren't nearly enough gray dots for this to be the case. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more on this map for the Biddy-Babs and Mini-Renas. There's also the fact that there are 5 gray dots in the plush trap hallway and only 1 animatronic. Yes, I know that there are Biddy-Babs there in Help Wanted, I just don't think that that's exactly real. Moving on. So if these aren't animatronics, then what could they possibly be? Simple. Charging pads. I think this for a few reasons. First of all, remember, this is an electrical map. Electricity is the entire purpose of this thing, and as such, I think that everything on the map should have to do with it. And if we look at where these gray dots are, you begin to notice a pattern. This is where all of the animatronics are supposed to be. Circus Baby, Ballora, and Funtime Foxy all have their stages, so there's a gray dot on all of those. And for Funtime Freddy, there's the gray dot in the breaker room, for the charging pad that we can literally see behind him. For the FNaF 4 Nightmare House, this is pretty easy to apply as well. Nightmare Chica's charging pad is in the kitchen, as that's somewhere where she can regularly visit in the game. Nightmare Bonnie is one of the 2 gray dots in the hallway, with the other one being Nightmare Foxy. Keep in mind, in case you haven't actually played FNaF 4 for yourself, the hallway is where Nightmare Foxy spawns before getting to your closet. He only starts off in the closet if you enable an extra difficulty modifier, which means that, if you're good enough, you can actually stop him from ever entering the closet for the entire night. Nightmare Freddy is a little bit wonky because technically the gray dot should be directly underneath where the white dot is, but honestly, I just think that Scott didn't want to overlay the 2 of them. As for the plush trap hallway, okay, technically we can't see a charging pad on the chair, but shut up, I'm counting it. And we technically can't disprove that thing having a charging pad on the seat anyway, so blech. The rest of the charging pads, however, would be hidden as they are in different rooms of the house. I don't think that these rooms need to be closets, considering that they're the same size as the kitchen and bedroom in the FNaF 4 Nightmare House, but again, this map isn't to scale, so who the heck knows? Not like we'll ever get a chance to look into them anyway. And of course, the 2 gray dots in Fredbear's are self-explanatory. That's where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie stood on stage. And now, we have the white dots, which, quite frankly, I think also has to do with electricity. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say. White dots have always signified us, the player. And you're right, we have always been a white dot, on security maps. But like I said, this isn't a security map, it's an electrical map. And besides, security maps have never had gray dots on them. And if you want a perfect example of this, look at Ennard Night. No gray dots there, but a giant white dot with U in all caps above it. Because this is a security map, and so it's showing us something different. So I don't think that the white dots on an electrical map are meant to be the same thing at all. I think that they're meant to be something relating to electricity, just like the gray dots are. So, what are they? well, we only really have one more thing to reference. This map of sister location we got before the game came out, showing where all of the animatronics tend to reside, and one giant white dot not labeled as anything. So I can only assume that this white dot represents what we see there in-game, an elevator. And as such, I think that all of these white dots are meant to be elevators. For this to work, it'd have to mean that elevators were built since the time that we actually see those 3 locations in-game. But thankfully, that's fine, because it's been over a decade since then, and throughout that decade, William Afton has gotten progressively more insane. So I think that, honestly, this isn't out of the realm of possibility. Is it the most satisfying conclusion? No, it's not. But we're not gonna get a satisfying conclusion out of this thing. There isn't one that exists. People have been trying for years, and the best answer that people have agreed upon are that these are all experiment victims that William has kidnapped over the years. And on that note, because of Didophobia, one of the final stories from Tales from the Pizzaplex, there's a fairly widespread belief that William Afton had actual nightmare gas experiment chambers within the continuity of the games. Well, okay, it's not entirely from Didophobia. There were always at least a few people who believed in it, but that story made it a lot more popular. But then Tales games got taken out back, and people still ran with this theory in spite of that happening, and I just don't agree with it. I don't think that William Afton had some kind of elaborate system in place for kidnapping children and putting them through terrifying lifelike simulations to try and study the human mind. I think that that's putting way too much on Didophobia, a story that's not meant to fit into the game's continuity. I don't think that we should be taking information from a book series that is clearly not within the same continuity to explain things, especially if we have either an alternative explanation that makes just as much sense, or a direct contradiction. And in the case of Didophobia, we do have a direct contradiction. In this story, everything that we see happening takes place underground, all on the same level of elevation. This includes the very same bedroom that the FNaF 4 nights are taking place in, and as I'm sure we all know, that room isn't underground, and certainly isn't on the same level of elevation as the sister location bunker. So no matter which way you slice it, Didophobia contradicts the games in some way. But even with all of that out there, I don't think that there's zero truth to this, to the idea that William is running experiments of some kind. Because if I'm being entirely honest with you, I don't see a world where William isn't doing something to screw with Michael's head. Going off of the idea that the gray dots on the breaker room map are charging pads, there are multiple animatronics that are set to be in and around Michael's bedroom. I think that's what FNaF 4 actually is, a literal nightmare torture simulator that Mike is going through, which is being partially conducted by his father, William. I say partially because I do think that at least some of this is in Mike's head, namely Nightmare Fredbear. That animatronic in particular seems to be especially personal to him, especially considering the fact that he draws it in the logbook. I think that that part was done by his own mind, but the rest, I think William had a lot to do with the rest. Now, there's something that I'm sure a lot of you are thinking right now, and something that probably quite a few of you have already left comments about because I didn't immediately address it. A good chunk of you probably think that I'm insane for insinuating that William Afton wasn't kidnapping and experimenting on kids, when that seems to be the primary purpose of the Funtime animatronics. And yeah, I get why you'd think that. That is what the Funtimes were designed to do. There's just one small problem with that. I'm pretty sure they were all terrible at their job. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I legitimately think that the Funtime animatronics were terrible at doing what they were built to do. Mostly because they're so unrealistic. I mean, think about it for a second. For a child to be kidnapped from a birthday party that the Funtimes were being rented out to, it would require a kid to be left alone with one of the animatronics. The thing is, the animatronics are, realistically speaking, probably the coolest thing at the whole party, and I doubt that a kid would be left alone with them. And sure, this worked on Elizabeth, But that was fundamentally different. That wasn't a case of an animatronic being rented out to a kid's birthday party. That was an instance where a handful of kids were exploring the new pizzeria that they'd never been inside of before. In a scenario like that, it makes a lot more sense for a child with a previously established desire to see Circus Baby up close and play with her to be left alone around her. But under most other circumstances, I just don't think that this is ever actually happening. Even if we're saying that kids get kidnapped at in-house parties like I did earlier, judging by the schedule, we can tell that those are happening nowhere near as often as the birthday parties that are being booked. So, yeah, I think that the Funtime animatronics were all bad at their job. And for the icing on the cake, I think that this is the main reason that Follow Me happened. I mean, if William already had a steady source of remnant available to him, then I can't imagine a world where he'd feel the need to go back to an old pizzeria, tear apart the old animatronics, and steal the remnant from them. I just don't think that there's a logical reason for him to do this. Unless, of course, he isn't getting more remnant. Ultimately, I think that this is why Molten MCI ended up having to happen, because William couldn't get the remnant from the other children to haunt the fun times, because there wasn't any remnant from the other children. Follow Me was his backup plan. And of course, it ended in his own death. It's ironic, really. The whole reason that William Afton died is because he was so tunnel-visioned on making his animatronics work that he ignored all of the danger he was getting himself into. A man that has a long history of screwing everything up finally thought that he could make something work if he took the biggest extreme that he could think of. And ultimately, that failed too. And it got him killed. Literally everything that he ever did failed. And the only thing that he ever truly managed to accomplish throughout all of his various different kinds of plots was killing his own family. Now that that's done, I want to talk a little bit more about William. Not as in psychoanalyzing him, I already did that, but exploring his overall impact on the story of Sister Location and everything around it. And the best way for us to go about doing this is to check on his private office that we can only access on ennard night. The private office is about as private as it is weird. The only way you can get to this room is by wandering around and finding a hidden door in a room that is deliberately kept dark all the time. So, I mean, yeah, private is right, but also, it's really weird. Why is it so hidden? And what's with the Fredbear plush and all of the cameras? What the hell is going on here? Let's take things one thing at a time. Let's start with the cameras, as I think they're probably the most interesting thing here. By entering 1983 into the number pad on the wall, 3 cameras turn on, 2 of a bedroom and 1 of the plush trap hallway. Now, personally, I think that these 2 camera views of the bedroom are showing the exact same room. One is clearly the FNaF 4 Nightmare bedroom, and the other is an overhead shot of specifically the Freddy plush. Not the Fredbear plush that we see on the table in front of us, it's specifically Freddy. Just like what we see in the FNaF 4 Nightmare bedroom. But my partner thinks that
they're different rooms! The reason they look the same is because Scott didn't want to make a new 3D texture for a bed when he already had a bed. Look at the sides of the image. They're all dark because Scott wanted you to think there's nothing beside the bed, but he still wants it to be vague and mysterious. It doesn't matter whether this is a Freddy plush or a golden Freddy plush, because if you look at the Fredbear Sing-In Show ticket, the bear was always Freddy the entire time. This is the FNaF 4 minigame bedroom, and the white dots on the breaker room map are these cameras. They're not elevators. I know this because I'm literally inside of Scott Cawthon's brain. I figured out how his mind works, and now I'm gonna take his place and literally be Scott Cawthon in real life and make better.
Anywho, I think that the only explanation for these cameras is that William was monitoring his children, or more specifically monitoring Michael. Considering you have to type 1983 into the wall to get these to come up, I fully believe that these cameras were set up after the death of the crying child, so it's not like William could ever monitor him from here. But I think that he'd definitely be monitoring Michael, and maybe Elizabeth? But it sounds like Elizabeth was down here with him at some point in time, namely when Baby was being built, so that might not have been necessary. He was definitely watching Michael though, and honestly, this is the one thing in the game that really makes me think that Michael was being experimented on to some extent. Because why else would these cameras be set up in these rooms? And on the note of things that are really weird about this room, the Fredbear plush, what the hell is up with this thing? Well, let's get one thing out of the way. It's almost certainly haunted by something. The reason that we think this is because every time that we see either Fredbear or Golden Freddy, he has either black or white eyes. And every time that he has black eyes, there's some weird haunted stuff going on, like the plush in the FNaF 4 minigames that teleports around, Stage 01 in FNaF 3 where he clips through the walls and sees different versions of the same scene, the logbook which literally has a conversation between two ghosts, FNaF 1 and 2 where he randomly appears and disappears and tries to kill you. You get the idea. As for how it got haunted, I don't know. Maybe it's an agony possession, maybe CC's soul just kinda latched onto it after he died, I don't know. But what I do know, or at least what I think that I know, is that this thing isn't holding a walkie-talkie. I get why people latched onto that idea for a long time, but to me, that looks more like a camera clicker. Like something you'd use to either swap your camera view or just rotate the cameras around, and yeah, that would make sense here in a room where you're staring at multiple different cameras. But I'm not gonna sit here and just deny the possibility that this can be a walkie-talkie, especially since I think that William Afton does speak to the crying child during certain parts of FNaF 4 through this thing, namely his death. I just think that using this as the nail in the coffin for Will Plush is a little bit wrong, since this definitely can be something else depending on how you look at it. The last thing I want to talk about here is what actually happens in this room when you enter it, because it kinda doesn't make sense. At least, it stops making sense with further context. Let me explain. In this night, Ennard is trying to kill you, which Baby is 100% a part of by this point in time, since you can hear her talking to you, and you can even hear Elizabeth's voice as well. You could argue that this is Funtime Freddy's voice mimicking effect, and while I think that this has something to do with it, I don't think that any of the Funtimes besides Baby actually know what Elizabeth sounds like, so no matter what, I think that Baby is involved with this attack. The part that makes this weird, though, is that all of the animatronics presumably still think that Michael is William. And in FNaF 6, we can see that Scrap Baby is completely loyal to William. So her attacking us here while thinking that we're William feels super out of character for her. This means one of four things. The first option is that at some point in time, Baby knew that Michael wasn't William, and wasn't fooled like the rest of the animatronics were. The second option is that, since she's a part of Ennard, there's a little bit of a power struggle going on between multiple animatronics trying to fight for control. The third option is that Baby's desire to escape from this bunker actually outweighs her twisted loyalty to her father. And the fourth option is that Scott Cawthon can't consistently write characters and didn't think about any of this when making either Sister Location or Pizzeria Simulator. Put all those options in a hack and pick whichever one you like the most, because ultimately it doesn't really matter here, because no matter what the explanation is, Ennard Night ultimately ends in the same way, with Ennard somehow getting into Mike's house and jumping him as soon as he finishes watching his favorite show, The Immortal and The Restless. Speaking of which, The Immortal and The Restless is one of the weirder parts of this game, if not the weirdest. It's somehow so random and yet so on the nose. We're like almost 2 hours into the video by this point, so I really don't want to waste time telling you everything that happens in these cutscenes, so let's just jump right into the important bits. This entire show is about the Afton family. On top of the very clear House on the Hill imagery, combined with the end cards all having some imagery akin to Murray's, including pine trees, a sun setting over a lake, and a house being on fire, all of the characters we see very clearly represent the Aftons. Because of this, I personally think that it reflects things that happened to them during the time that Mike was a baby. Because the baby is very clearly meant to be Mike, as he's a vampire child who looks just like his vampiric father. And his father, Vlad, doesn't want to be a dad. He goes as far as denying the fact that the baby is his, and says that he can't be a father. So why the hell did he decide to have two more later? Regardless of future endeavors, we can very clearly see that he's a neglectful father in the show, being told so regularly that he needs to see his son and be a part of his life, which lines up perfectly with how he acts in the games. As for his relationship with Clara, it's strained. The way that Clara talks and a few of the things that she does kind of implies that the two of them were, at the very least, engaged to each other. She does outright say, "I'm keeping the diamond ring," which is typically an engagement ring rather than a wedding ring. That said, it's also kinda giving that the two of them have been separated for a while, especially since Clara is trying to get Vlad to pay backed child support. And then they kiss and make up at the end if you beat Ennard Night. There are a lot of people who think that this happening isn't canon because you have to get a non-canon ending for it to happen, but since this is supposed to represent the Aftons anyway, and William ends up having 2 more children, he kind of needs to make up with her at some point or another. Not to mention the fact that William is, at least loosely, in Michael's life to some extent. This would mean that either something bad happened to Mrs. Afton, or that the two of them made up. Though, honestly, I think it's a mix of both. I think that they had to make up in order for them to have more children together, but based on the characterization of Clara here, I don't think that she would just leave, you know? Nothing about this character makes me think that she'd ever abandon her son, let alone her other children. And considering the fact that Michael lives with his father later on in life, and that there's no mother figure to be seen, Mrs. Afton definitely isn't around anymore. It's impossible for us to say exactly what happened to her, but I feel fairly confident that she didn't just voluntarily step out of their lives. We've been talking about Mrs. Afton for a little while now, and to be honest, I do have a few more things to say about her. But honestly, I think that she kind of deserves her own video at some point. I think that the Immortal and the Restless kind of confirms the fact that she is a real character that had a real impact on the story, even if she's never properly named. But before I even think about making that video, let's go over the rest of what's presented to us through Clara. The most apparent thing about Clara that we need to talk about is her color scheme. If you were to invert it, you get something remarkably similar to Ballora's color scheme, and vice versa if you were to do the same to Ballora. The idea of Ballora meaning to represent Mrs. Afton is something that's been talked to death for years, and this is one of the stronger pieces of evidence for it, I think, along with the staff bot table and security breach. Speaking of Ballora, I think that her song is rather interesting. While it's true that her song was actually written by her voice actress, Scott didn't have to include it in the game. Taking that song and putting it into the game was a deliberate choice on Scott's part. It's not like Security Breach where he just told people some things to do and they made a game out of it themselves. He's the only one that's responsible for things that we see in Sister Location. And because of this, I think that the contents of her song are actually relevant. And considering she says, compare this to Clara literally calling Vlad's house a morgue toward the end of The Immortal and the Restless, and we have yet another connecting line between the two of these characters. That is, unfortunately, all that's really left to talk about with Clara specifically. But something else about her that I find interesting is the fact that Mike specifically calls her out in the logbook as his favorite character, because she's the only other person who notices that everything around her is insane. I think that this probably speaks to Mike's relationship with his mother. I think that whatever the two of them had going on, it was a lot healthier than everything that he has going on with his father. Not that that's a hard bar to clear by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know. To end this video off, I want to take a moment to go a little more in-depth on Michael, and more specifically his speech at the end of the game's custom night. Honestly, I'm a little bit confused on when this is supposed to happen, because on one hand, it makes a lot of sense if this speech is to happen pre-FNaF 3. I'm going to come find you feels like it's meant to reference the events of FNaF 3, rather than what happens after. And him going on about how he should be dead would be a little bit redundant if he'd already encountered his father, who should see the fact that his skin has literally rotted away and turned him into a walking corpse. For those reasons, I think that it makes more sense if this speech is happening before FNaF 3. But then you get to the visuals. You literally see Springtrap in a burned down version of Fazbear's Fright, which implies that this speech kind of has to be happening after FNaF 3, even though the actual audio makes way more sense if it's happening before FNaF 3 in my mind. To be honest, I don't know which of these makes more sense to me, but my gut is saying that this happens pre-FNaF 3, probably within the days following Mike ejecting Ennard out of his body. I also take this speech to be not only the final bit of cementing proof that Mike does just look like his father, but also proof that he really doesn't like the guy.
They didn't recognize me at first, but then They thought I was you.
The sound he makes after that is somewhere between a scoff and a bitter chuckle. Probably a bit of both, really. I'm sure that he at least feels disgusted by his father, since at this point in time, I imagine that Michael is fairly aware of all of the horrible things that he's done. Especially considering how menacing he sounds at the end there. And speaking of the things that he says...
And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now.
This is the final thing in the game that I think we really need to talk about. This is the second time we hear this term, and we really don't know for certain what it means. But I think that in this context, given the way that the series has been up to this point, I kinda think that putting someone back together is another way of giving them life. Or rather, giving them a life. By doing what he did, Michael was able to get Elizabeth out of her entrapment, and now she's free. I think that putting someone back together might just mean freeing them from whatever prison that they're stuck in, be it death, an animatronic shell, or anything in between. And thanks to what Mike did, she's been put back together. An alternate explanation for this might be that this is actually something a lot more literal. If Liz was the first victim of the fun times, and by proxy the first one who was scooped, then there's a real chance that her remnant was spread out slightly throughout the rest of the funtime animatronics during every single scoop. This could explain two things. For one, it would explain why Baby seems to have influence over the rest of the fun times, because she is a literal part of them. It would also explain how Mike was able to put all of them back together. When he was scooped, after sending Circus Baby to the scooper, he was able to take every single bit of Elizabeth's remnant and put it all in the same body, effectively making her whole once more. But that's a bit too dark of an interpretation, I think. I personally don't like it nearly as much as my first one, but I wanted to at least present it as an alternative. And with that, we have covered everything that I can think to cover about Sister Location. Everything from the timeline, to what's going on inside of the bunker, and of course, to Michael. A character who, despite looking exactly like his father, much to his detriment, seems to take after his mother. And as we can tell by the logbook, he probably still thinks about her, even to this day. And that's why he became an arsonist. Thanks for watching. You know, going into this video, I really wanted to make it shorter than the FNaF 4 video. I really, truly did. But, clearly that didn't happen. But maybe it's for the best that I'm not trying to make these shorter because, boy howdy is the FNaF 6 video gonna be long. For reference, I have over an hour's worth of content on my channel about FNaF 6, covering one minigame, one animatronic, and one Candy Cadet story. And that's not even scratching the surface on the amount of content that is in that game. It's honestly a little bit scary. That video might be over 3 hours long depending on how much I want to actually talk about. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And that will be sometime this year. I won't say exactly when because I have no idea when, but it's going to be this year. That much I am sure of. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're here during the first week of the video, hype it up for me too. And if you're feeling really generous, become a member. Every bit of support is greatly appreciated. Stay tuned for more content, eventually. I'd like to be more consistent with the channel, but clearly I'm doing a pretty bad job about that right now. I have been streaming a bit more often though, so that's something. And with that, I'm out of here. Take it easy.